He's Howard Ibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 28 years of experience. Together, Henry and I love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Henry, we're back with another episode, and we're continuing our series about young graduates or recent graduates. And in today's case, we have 2 current students at the School of Communication Arts in London. Their names are Carlotta Delicia and Emily Bowler. They're going to tell us their stories. Let's join the conversation. Hey, Henry, we are back with another episode of the Brief Brothers. Today, we are joined by 2 young women from London. They are weeks away from concluding their very intense program at the School of Communication Arts, which is run by our friend, Mark Lewis. They are Carlotta Delicia and Emily Bowler. So Carlotta and Emily, welcome to the Brief Brothers. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so happy to be here.
Have you done a podcast before?
No, never. Neither of us have ever done a podcast. No.
All right, we'll be gentle. We'll be gentle.
Okay. We can take it. We've been through the SCA. We know Mark.
Okay.
So.
Well, if just before I hit the record button, you were telling us a little bit about the intensity of your program, which I want you to go into in details. If you can handle that, this should be a breeze.
Cool.
Mark Lewis Henry and I have known Mark Lewis for, I don't know, a couple of years. We've talked to him before, and we started this thing where we wanted to talk with young talent, either freshly graduated from these programs here in the United States as well as in the UK. And I think you 2 will be the first who are still in the program, not quite finished, but almost finished. So that'll give us a different perspective. But the point of these conversations is, we love talking with the veterans and the oldsters and the people who've got this bazillion years of experience, and we talk about all kinds of things. It doesn't make sense to talk about our industry if we don't also get the perspective of young people, especially, one of the questions that I want to ask is, why did you choose advertising? And we'll get to that. So we're really excited about continuing this conversation with fresh talent. And we're going to start by asking each of you to tell us a little bit about why advertising. Why did you choose this? What drew you to it? Were you working in the field before you took these classes, or was did you think this was your avenue into doing what you wanted to do? Give us a little background on how you got where you are.
Sure, of course. Yeah, I'll go first. So I actually studied history of art in the UK, in London. And I'd been working before starting the SCA. I'd been working for about 4 years in the contemporary art market. First at an auction house called Phillips Auction House as a sale coordinator. And then I started working for a dealer in Mayfair who dealt with contemporary art. And basically I got to a point where I was 26 and I'd kind of gotten to where I thought I really wanted to be. I thought that would be my end goal. I'd reached kind of the peak of where I wanted to be at that part of my life, I thought. And then I just realized that I felt like something was missing and I couldn't really put my finger on it. So on a whim, impulsively, I quit my job without a backup plan. I was just I know that this is what should make me happy on paper, and it just isn't. And then I'd heard of someone previously that had done a portfolio course and had managed to pivot their career. And I decided that I would give myself a year off work and just try different things. So on a whim, I booked a call with Mark, and we had maybe a 45 to 1 hour conversation about what we just said right now. And he invited me to come to selection day. And then I remember selection day is basically this part of the interview process where he gets candidates to come up and do a 4-minute presentation about themselves, and it can be anything. And I'd read that people did crazy things like cook an omelet in 4 minutes, absurd, obscene things.
One girl pretended to give birth to a light bulb.
Yeah, another girl pretended to give birth to a light bulb. Another guy brought used dildos. So I was like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? I can't do that. But I just, I got up, I'd had maybe 2 hours to prepare. I just said what I had to say. I did a bit of stand up, which probably looking at it now is so embarrassing. And I got in, And so I kind of just dove in head first, not really knowing much about the industry at all, just knowing that I wanted a fresh start. And I knew that the SCA was probably the best place for me to get that. Yeah.
Well, we now have solid evidence that advertising is in fact a crazy, crazy industry, just from
Yeah.
listening to this. And before Emily, before you jump in, I just need to ask you, Carlotta, your British accent sounds like you're from Kansas.
Yeah, I don't have a British accent. I don't know. I think Mark said I did, but I don't.
I don't think you do.
I'm
Where are you from?
Yeah,
So
where
I'm
you from?
Yeah, where am I from? That's a good question. So my father is from Buenos Aires, and I was born in Argentina, and my mother is Italian from Rome. So I've got mixed heritage, but I was basically put in the American education system since I was a kid, and I've just grown up on loads of trash American TV, mainly because neither of my parents are American, like native English speakers. And so I would be 8 years old watching like Maury and the Jerry Springer show, and they like didn't really understand what was going on. Their English isn't great. So they're like just learning the language.
Were you living in the States?
Yeah, so I lived in the States for a brief period when I was in third grade. And that's when it was in Manhattan because my dad works for the UN. So we were moving around. And that's really when I actually discovered advertising, really, because I was living in Rome before then. And like Rome in the early 2000s was like very different to the States. I feel like now everything is pretty much the same, but like Rome in the early 2000s was like 3 channels, one for kids, the news, and then the Vatican. And I came to the United States in New York, and I was like, first of all, there's something called cable, which I'd never heard of. Second of all, there's ads for everything. Like, and I was 8 and I was like, oh my God. And then the third thing that I found the most fascinating, and probably what I was like, okay, there's definitely something here, was that you'd get an ad for a pharmaceutical, and then the second ad would be like, if you've had side effects from this pharmaceutical, you can claim up too, you know. And I was like, okay, everyone's trying to sell you shit.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
You said you were like in the American educational system. I presume there's American schools in different countries that you were living in.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah, different Americans. Yeah.
For people that may not be aware, right, that in most major cities in the world, there are expatriate Americans or Americans that work in international organizations or whatever. And so there's a demand for quote unquote American schools and
American universities in every city or major cities.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, Emily, your turn. Tell us about you.
So my story is a little bit different to Carlotta's. I was born in South London and I've lived in South London my entire life. I was never particularly good at school. It didn't really click for me, but I found art was like a thing and I was like, okay, I'm actually pretty good at this. And it makes me happy to do it. So I left college with 2 A-levels, one in photography and one in fine art. And I went on to do a bachelor's in photography at the London College of Communication, which is connected to University of the Arts London. When I was working in university, I was working as a supervisor in a pub in Brixton. Like I didn't really like advertising very much. I was very against the man at the time and I didn't like it. But then I started to realize I was feeling really unsatisfied and I was feeling really bored and I knew I wasn't living a life which made me happy and I wasn't being creative and I wasn't working in a creative job, which I knew I was just meant to do. So my mum was chatting to her friend and she was like, you know, you should meet a friend of my friend who is a wonderful woman called Liz Harold, who used to work in recruiting and advertising back in the day. So I went around to Liz's house on like a gloomy December morning. I knew nothing about advertising. I just had my photography website and I must have chatted with her for about 3 hours about everything and anything. And then I showed her my work and she was like, you need to go to the SCA. And I was like, what is this? Like, I knew nothing. And she was like, you're born to be a creative in advertising. Like, you can do this. So she introduced me to Mark and Mark invited me in a few weeks later and I sat in on a masterclass, which was actually given by Graham Fink. So before I even knew anything about advertising, I was lucky enough to sit and listen to Graham Fink talk about his Dixon ads and moving to Shanghai and stuff and working for Ogilvy there. So after seeing that, I was like, oh my God, I need to come to the SCA. I applied, did the selection day, which Carlotta told you about. In my selection day, I played the trumpet. Bear in mind, I cannot play the trumpet. Like I had never picked up a trumpet. And it was so bad. And I played it and like no sound came out. And everyone laughed and I was like, no, like let me have a second chance. And I gave another go and like the loudest sound came out. And I was like, yes. And then yeah, I got in and it's been amazing.
Sounds like the bar for these 4-minute interviews isn't very high.
You
Well,
don't even
It's just an initiation to embarrass
yeah,
you.
I mean,
They're just hazing you, probably.
we have to do, creatives have to do all kinds of presentations, you know, every day in one way or another, to our partner, to our boss. If we're fortunate enough, we get to do it to a client. So I completely see the value of what Mark, I don't know if this is Mark's idea or this is someone else's idea, but it is like throw you into the deep end, baptism by fire, whatever you want to call it. Just get up there and do it. I didn't realize that it was, at least from what you have said, relatively easy to get an appointment with Mark. I'm
sorry.
He'll just pick up the phone and say, come on in and come see me.
Yeah, that was the kind of the easiest part of all of this, is that you can just schedule an appointment with him and his calendar, and then you have a chat, and then it's really, really like quick whether he wants you to come in or not based off of that chat. And usually from speaking to previous students and even like the admissions, they kind of say like that call is more defining than the selection day itself, because from the selection day onwards, because Mark has kind of gotten to know you a little in this discovery call, he kind of wants you to do well, which I think at the end of the day is the spirit at the SCA, because yes, it is like intimidating. You get up there, you have to do all sorts of tricks, juggling, you feel a bit like a circus animal, but at the end of the day, everyone's super supportive and they want you to do well. So it's not nasty.
You know what this reminds me of? Because I teach workshops on Creative Brief, but one of my workshops is called The Essentials of Public Speaking. And it's rather deceptive because it's not about practicing your speech. It's all improv. And what you were doing there was improv.
Yeah.
You may not have known it, but that's improv. You didn't know. Improv is usually initiated with a prompt, but you brought in your own prompt. It's like, Emily, you didn't know how to play the trumpet, but you said, let's give it a go.
I have a question. Where did you get your hands on a trumpet if you're not a trumpet player?
The way I got to playing the trumpet is I talked through my photography. So I used to sell my work to Vice magazine, and I used to do exhibitions on the side and stuff. Like I was a very avid lover of photography. So I was working as a nanny on the side to get some side pennies, because being a pub supervisor doesn't pay very well. And I was nannying these kids that were really musical. So some of the work I showed in my selection day was this, if I may say so myself, quite nice portrait photography of these kids in like their sports gear, playing their instruments in the garden. It was really sweet. And then I said to them, like, because I knew people did really OTT stuff in their selection day. I knew showing the photos alone wouldn't be enough. So I took
OTT meaning over the top?
Over the top?
Yeah. Like
we're slow, but we catch on.
So I
Acronyms.
I asked the dad of the kid I was photographing. I was like, look, can I borrow this trumpet? Like I had this interview coming up and I think it could be like the make or break for me. So luckily he said yes. And yeah.
Well, here's what's fascinating to me. You do these crazy things to get in, and you're in. Did the beginning parts of the courses that you were doing, the work that they were immersing you in, were you able to, did you find yourself confirming that you'd made the right decision very quickly? Was it what you expected it to be, the training and the classes and the work?
It's hard to say, because I feel like it definitely wasn't what I was expecting, because Mark loves to throw curveballs at you, because I think that's how he knows that, you know, whenever you're out of your comfort zone, that's when you're learning. That's kind of like the whole point of the SCA. And so, for example, like he threw a curveball at us the first day that we started. He was like, by the way, at the end of next week, on Sunday, you're going to be performing live comedy. Like each of you are going to be doing 6 minutes of stand-up comedy, and you're going to be practicing every day this evening with a comedy coach. We've rented a pub. The audience, like people are coming, and we were all like, oh, okay,
This is happening.
So I think that's also how we like all of us bonded, because we had this like, you know, Mr. C, he's a stand-up comedian based in London. He's great. And he mentored us, but he just kind of told us, okay, get up here and just tell me, you know, 5 interesting facts about yourself and make them funny in front of a group of people you've never met. So it's you know, it is a baptism by fire, but yeah, you never stop learning.
That's improv.
Yeah.
I remember I took an improv class when I was in Los Angeles, and I had to do 1 minute stand up, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about until I was in front of the mic, and the instructor said, dish towels.
Oh my goodness.
So I had to be funny for 1 minute on dish towels.
Oh
Thank
my
goodness
God.
it's only a minute. You had to do it for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're doing all these crazy things, and this is a side of SCA that this is kind of new to me. I think it's new to both of Henry and me, because we know we've met a couple of your alums who have now moved on into the work world, but we didn't really talk as much about what they did while they were in program. So you're doing these crazy things. You're doing the stand up. You're doing the Marcus throwing curveballs.
Yeah.
How long was it before you got your first brief?
We got our first brief technically on the first day.
Yeah, so on the first day, he got us to make all these videos with AI, and it was crazy because none of us really knew much about AI.
We didn't know each other. He just put us into teams and said, okay, you have to, you know, make this video with AI. Not much like instruction other than that. Put it on YouTube and, you know, we'll show it at the end of the day. And then every day that week there was a different brief. So we started working straight away.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that he put you into teams, or you two the team that got, or did you, that was afterwards that you kind of got together as, and are you a team that?
Yes.
Okay.
So when you start the SCA, he essentially works with the office to create a system in which you work with every other student. Because in the UK, a lot of agencies prefer to hire teams, a copyright and art director, rather than single creatives. So to enable us to find the perfect partner for us, he has us partner up with everyone else. But Carlotta and I partnered up probably early February.
So presumably you're the Emily, you're the art director, and Carlotta's the copywriter.
Yeah,
you got it.
You're right.
All right, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier, Emily, because I've picked this up in other conversations, and we were talking about how you got into this. You said, I was feeling bored.
Yeah.
And the point I wanted to make, and you confirm this for me. Tell me if you see it the same way. For me, I've discovered over the years, this is something that was kind of a slow awareness that that's come to me. Boredom is a signal that I recognize as a good thing. When I start to feel this sense of boredom, I know that something is waiting for me around the corner. This is not, I'm really bored because I have nothing to do. It's, I'm not satisfied with what I'm doing right this moment. And instead of feeling negative, I kind of like, ooh, I need to just be aware. I don't know what's coming, but it's a little clue. Did you recognize that in yourself or not?
I totally hear that. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Like, boredom doesn't have to be a negative thing. It doesn't have to be an anxious thing. It's kind of like a signal to yourself, like, you know, change is coming. You do have to make the decision to make that change and take the correct steps so that you are more satisfied with your life. But totally, I think that's a really great way of looking at it.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the day-to-day stuff at SCA, because that really fascinates me. I know Henry has done some teaching at the Miami Ad School. I do,
and a couple of universities locally.
Couple of universities, yeah. And I do a lot of workshops for, you know, inside corporations. But that's an entirely different thing. You are coming to this with some or almost no experience. And Emily, you said that there was a time in your life when you were like anti-advertising, and that has obviously changed. So talk to us about the day-to-day stuff. You get your briefs, you're figuring out who's going to be my partner. You're meeting people, you're starting to meet some people who come to talk to you from the agencies in London and thereabouts. Was there a moment in the early days of your experience at SCA when you said, I'm home? Or did you know that right away? When did that happen? When did you realize this is where I belong?
I think that happened for me. We have this craft mentor called Ian Hands, and he is just a fantastic man. And I think, and obviously there's lots of different mentors at SCA, and they all do different masterclasses and different workshops. And I think the first time I heard a masterclass from Ian, I don't think he was even teaching us anything specific. He was just showing us ads and like pointing out like, this is nice typography, this is nice color palettes. That was when it clicked in my head and I was like, okay, like this is really cool. Like advertising is a way which can enable you to be creative and look at nice colors and fonts and pictures all day, but for there to be like meaning behind it. But I think, going back to your question, I think when I heard Ian give his first few masterclasses, I was like, yeah, okay, like this is where I am. And still, like Ian's masterclasses are the highlights of my week. Like he does like whole masterclasses just on like white space, and I'm sitting at the front like enamored by this like screen with like one small thing in the corner. Like it's
okay. She's a nerd.
amazing.
She's an advertising nerd.
I've always marveled at how when you have civilians that don't work in advertising, right, which is 99.9% of people. Advertising is so ubiquitous, but there's so little thought among the consumers about like, how did that get made? Like, or, why did they make that decision? Or it feels like it's something it's in your life as a consumer, but you really don't give it any, like, and occasionally an ad will break through and you'll say, oh, that's a nice ad, or that's funny, or I might want to buy that product, or wow, that was really not funny at all, that was horrible, or what. But not a lot of contemplation. And it's not until you get into it, right, and you kind of peel back a very thin layer of, okay, somebody has to make all of these decisions, like that actress, what the actress says, what the surrounding environment is going to be, whether this ad was going to be funny or emotional, or like all of those are calculated decisions. And there's an industry that completely supports this. And it's just, I always just found that very the duality of it. Like we pour so much time and energy, and clients specifically, like, no, don't do that, do this, or every decision is scrutinized at the micro level. And for consumers, it's just something that like washes over them with very little contemplation.
Yeah.
Which is why it's hard when you work in advertising. Particularly, I'm a strategist, so it's hard to explain to people that don't work in advertising what the hell you do.
Yeah, it's so true.
Well, Carlotta, what was the moment like for you? When did you realize that SCA was where you needed to be?
I think it was actually at the end of the first week. We were in Hampstead Heath in September with Deanna Rogers, who's an amazing poet, Grand Slam champion, and it was just so inspiring. And we were at Keats' house, and we just like read and wrote poetry, and it just felt so different to what I'd usually be doing on a Friday in an office, like looking at a spreadsheet or shopping for artworks. And so it's just like, yeah, this is where I'm meant to be. It just felt great.
Poetry, wow,
yeah.
That's pretty cool. I mean, my background is poetry.
Yeah.
And in previous episodes, Henry and I regaled our guests or ourselves with how we found our way to this industry. And like a lot of others, strategists and creatives alike, I didn't get my first job until I was almost 30. So I was doing other stuff. And Henry has a similar story. So I'm always fascinated when we have conversations with students or former students from the SCA and other programs that they have found this profession so early, which I think is wonderful. The industry needs you.
Mhm.
Because you know, we talk to a lot of oldsters who have lots of things to bemoan, but we prefer, we enjoy talking to younger people who haven't been jaded yet. Although, you know, the act of being jaded happens earlier and earlier all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just because and you're probably aware of this, but the industry has changed dramatically. You know, our society has changed very rapidly, especially from I'll say about 96 onward, basically the development of the consumer internet, and then all of the changes that have come. And advertising, frankly, is the tip of the spear in all of that kind of societal technological change, where we see it a lot of times before, like, all those 99.9% of consumers that don't work in advertising see the changes. And nobody, and I'm talking about all humans, nobody likes to have their cheese moved, right? Like
Yeah.
you came up in a certain way, in a certain system, there was a certain way of doing things, and suddenly that is upset, and it's being upset at a increasingly rapid cycle. And so that's why you get a lot of oldsters like us, you know, being jaded. But it is, I guess, always been part of advertising that we're on the tip of that sphere of cultural, pop cultural, and technological change.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Are your friends who are not in the industry encouraging what you're doing, perplexed by what you're doing? What's the reaction?
My friends were so happy when I told them, like, look, there's this job, it's an art director, and I'm gonna go to advertising school and I'm gonna make it happen. They were just like, yes. My best mates, Johnny, he was like, I'm so happy to hear this because I know you've not been happy with what you've been doing. So they were all just over the moon for me with the fact that I found something that they really believed I would love. And they were right, because I do love it. So they've been nothing but supportive.
I guess my friends are more like on the confused side because I don't think any of them like do advertising at all. And so when I explain that, like, they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, well, I'm like doing a book. And they're like, oh, so you're writing a novel? And I'm like, no, I'm making a portfolio and I'm working with an art director. So yeah, they definitely don't get it. And they're like, what did you do today? And I'm like, well, I made an activation for a Pringles campaign. They don't really get it, no.
So let me ask a $64,000 question, and I'm just gonna come out and say it. How do you guys feel about capitalism?
Oh, okay, that's a loaded question.
Henry's very you know, indirect in that way.
I guess personally, I've benefited from capitalism my whole life, and that's what I know. So to a certain extent, I'm all for it. I guess, yeah, the free market. At the end of the day, like, I guess this is like where our profession kind of flourishes, to be honest. And I think it allows for, you know, bigger conversations around creativity and provocation and everything else, I think, definitely. And also, like, potentially not all comms being tied to the state is probably a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's good and bad. It depends which lens you're looking from it. You're looking at it from. But whether you like it or not, it has benefited some societies, our society being one of them. So, you know, you can either spend your whole life hating it or say, you know what, I'm gonna use this and I'm gonna make a job out of myself and I'm gonna use it for my career. So it really depends your personal take on it and how you want to use it as a tool for yourself.
The reason, go ahead.
I was just going to ask a follow-up to that. Let me just get into the weeds. You obviously aspire to land a job in an agency, right?
Yeah.
So let's say the program is done in July and you land your first job in August or September, or maybe right out of school. And the account you're put on is toothpaste. How would you feel about that?
I'm gonna be like, yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
I don't fuck yeah. Gray,
Yeah.
gray
You can't say fuck on this show.
Okay, sorry.
He's fucking lying.
Yeah.
Sorry, fucking rude. Sorry.
As a London agency, Grey London, there's two creatives who left SCA a few years ago, and they've recently worked on the coolest campaign for Aquafresh, and it's all about, you know, not every kid has got perfect teeth, kids have got braces, kids have got sag teeth, like
Wonky teeth.
yeah, wonky teeth, just embracing it. And they made all these little toothbrushes, like with different, like some had like 3 heads for your teeth that are all a bit far apart. So I'd be like, fuck yeah, let's see what we can do with it.
I think that the great privilege of the SCA is that we get put on live briefs from agencies that end up being stuff like toothpaste or hand sanitizer, just like kind of stuff. But the great thing is that we're taught to look at the human behavior and the human insight into it, and it almost always ends up being interesting.
Yeah.
We almost always have, well, I would say always have at least half of the ideas given from the cohort on the driest brief being great.
Yeah.
I like that. That's interesting. We've had as a guest. Go ahead, Henry.
No,
I don't want to monopolize.
I just wanted to say the reason I asked the question earlier is because you guys are creative people, and the reason you got into this is because you're creative people, and creative people have a certain way of thinking, and it kind of feels sometimes at odds with the industry that you're in. I myself am an unabashed capitalist, and Howard's heard me say this analogy many times. Basically, in a free market system, and you said, Carlotta, free market, and I think that's the way. I think capitalism has been labeled kind of a bad word, but a market system in which people work voluntarily, making things voluntarily that other people buy voluntarily, is better than the alternative, which is somebody is mandating and telling you must do this, or there will only be one brand of toothpaste or whatever. And I would argue that all of the elevation out of poverty that we've seen globally over the last couple of 100 years has been in this voluntary exchange of goods and services, and not any other system of command and control. Even in countries like China, how have they been able to lift all of the hundreds of millions of people out of poverty that were previously living in poverty? Was when they reformed their economy and made it more market-based, incentivized, for market-based. So the reason I say that is just for young people to not feel like, I think the worst thing would be if you were working in a field where you didn't feel that you were contributing something good to the world. And the way I feel is, if you're helping a company that's making products voluntarily for people that buy them voluntarily, hey, that's a good to the world. You're giving people more choice. You're giving people more opportunities to work, to do, so we're kind of, again, the tip of the spear in terms of capitalism, right? Because a lot of times the first interaction people will have with a brand or a product is through the advertising.
Yeah.
So, anyway, soapbox.
Well, it's a great Henry tells that a lot, and I enjoy it because he and I think alike in this area. But we've had a friend of ours and a past guest, and he'll be a future guest. His name Cameron Day. He's written 2 books about his experiences in advertising. He is the son of Guy Day of Chiat Day fame, an agency you may have heard of. They did, all the Apple computers. Cam is right. Couple of accounts here and there. Cam lives in Austin, and he asked this question rhetorically. I think it's addressed to young people. If you were given the opportunity, if the both of you were given the opportunity to work for an agency where you could work on Nike or Apple, or you could work for a company or for an agency where your product was toothpaste, which would you choose, and on which account do you think you'd have the most likelihood of having an impact?
Probably toothpaste.
Yeah, my gut feeling is toothpaste as well. I think especially when you're first starting out. I think another thing at the SCA that we're told is, like, when you're fresh and new to the industry, like, go for the shit briefs, go for the stuff that none of the creatives want to touch. Like, do radio, do like the toothpaste that no one's heard of. I think that's also, like, I'm also, like, I guess to Henry's point, there's also something about, and this is why I think I had problems in, like, working in the art world, because it's such an exclusive industry, and I think like working on utilitarian products that, like you said, people are buying voluntarily, that feels more, I guess, like in line with my values, probably. Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
I mean, the chance to really do something that's never been done for Coca-Cola or Apple or Nike is like pretty
Yeah.
small. But
Yeah.
I've when I've done my trainings, I often ask, when I do trainings where multiple representatives of multiple brands come to the workshop, I ask them, I said, how many of you, raise your hand, think you work on a boring brand? And I'm
Mhm.
surprised when 25 to 30% of the people raise their hand. They work with maybe in its insurance company or financial. And I say, there's no such thing as a boring brand. There's only boring brand advertising.
Yeah.
And the shit brief, or the brand perceived to be boring, is the one I want to work on, because that's where I have the biggest opportunity to make an impact. Go
the
ahead.
Yeah.
biggest stories of of brands in this industry are the ones that were brands that were nowhere, and suddenly the advertising changed their trajectory.
Mhm.
And Howard and I have talked about these. In 1975, BMW was a floundering European brand
74.
in the 74 in the
74.
in the American market, and and they had an RFP, and there was a little agency that was going out of business that came up with a line, the ultimate driving machine. And it
Mhm.
basically, BMW for many years was the leading imported car in America. So it
Mhm.
went from being an also ran to being Old Spice is a very old
Yeah.
brand, and in
Mhm.
that was nowhere. And in 2006, Wyden and Kennedy got a shit brief from a shit brand and have made it into one of the most exciting advertising stories of the last
Absolutely.
20
Yeah.
years. So when you're working for a brand that's already got stature, it's a lot harder to move the needle. It's a lot
Mhm.
easier, or not easier, but it's a lot more obvious when you move the needle for
Yeah. Very true.
a tiny brand or a niche thing or something that feels very pedestrian, and suddenly it's like, you know and there's a million of these stories. There was um uh, a company here in the States, and I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but it's called Dollar Shave Club. And Dollar Shave Club was a startup. It was basically a subscription service to get razors at like below, like men's grooming stuff has gotten outrageously expensive, and
Mhm.
razors are ridiculously expensive, the cartridges and all that. And so this was a little startup and called Dollar Shave Club, and they had like these very cheap monthly subscriptions to get razors at much cheaper than what you could get at retail. And the the main thing the guy did was he created this funny long form video, and he put it on YouTube, and the thing went viral. It
Mhm.
went viral to the point that people were seeing this message, and not only were they entertained and sharing it, they started subscribing to this thing. And eventually he sold it. I don't remember if it was to P&G or to Unilever. He sold it to one of them. The guy became a huge multimillionaire selling his little startup to one of the competitors that he was basically attacking. But I think the point is that one little act of brilliance was what put the thing on the map. If he had
Yeah.
done something subpar, nobody would have noticed it, and he might still be trying to schlep Dollar Shave Club subscriptions to people. But he became a player and was able to sell.
Yeah.
That's a great opportunity, I think, to do a segue and ask, you are approaching end date, your graduation date. And I'm going to guess that you're already maybe putting out some feelers or
Yeah.
talking to Mark
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
what's the plan? What's the ambition?
So at the SCA, we're encouraged to go on lots of book crits, which is where we essentially take our portfolio to senior creatives at agencies which we want to work at, show them our work, get to know them on like a human level, and get feedback, and create that relationship. I think our plan is, well, we're taking August because the SCA's been intense. We've decided we need a holiday. So we're taking August.
No one works in August in Europe
Exactly.
anyway. It's not like
Yeah.
it's not like the States.
It's holiday
It's
season.
one tradition we haven't
Yeah,
adopted over
exactly.
here.
It's like one
sadly.
long Thanksgiving.
It's fantastic. And then I think in September we're gonna try for placements. We have heard it's a tough climate out there at the moment, so we're treading carefully, but we're working with some really motivating people, and like it is looking promising.
Yeah,
Just
definitely.
if we keep going the way that we're going, we'll be fine.
Yeah, we've also been like something that's really been hammered into us at the SCA is also like creating opportunities for yourself and creating fame for yourself and like building your brand. So we've been doing like quite a bit of that as well on socials, but also in person. Like for example, like last Sunday, I don't know if obviously I'm not sure if people talk about it much in the US, but there's an election coming up here on July
Yeah.
4th.
Mhm.
Yeah. And obviously, like in so many countries, there's an issue with young voters not turning up to vote, and obviously that is really bad because then the same parties stay in power and blah blah blah. So we actually went out on Sunday and wheat pasted fly posters that we made for a campaign for voting, and then we did like a social activation. We interviewed people. We reached out to a few newspapers, and we're getting the work like kind of made. Soon. We can't really talk about it much, but
Not very much, but it's gonna be
it's
really
happening.
exciting.
So even stuff like that, I think.
Do you have a website?
It's in the
for the two?
we have a
We have a
website. It's in the
website.
works. I can send it to you by the time this podcast goes out, so that we have a live website with this podcast. If that would be helpful for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to promote you as much as we can.
Yeah.
Obviously, job offers over here are not going to be,
Yeah.
your first choice. But
Still good to be talked about.
what advice would you give to your friends or people your age who are maybe in where you were 10 months ago,
Who were about to start the SCA?
or thinking about it, or a little uncertain about their future, or maybe they have a negative attitude about advertising?
I think I would say just trust the process.
Yeah.
Like you really need to trust yourself, and you need to sort of let go of everything else and understand like you can't have control over certain things. And as much as it would be great that everything goes your way, that's not always going to be the case. So just like sit back, try your hardest not to let life overwhelm you. And if you embrace it, it will be okay.
I guess if it was a friend who was starting the SCA, I would say probably mirroring what Emily said, just trust the process. Because I think that if you go into it like gritting your teeth and resisting, then you won't.
It's not going to work.
It's just not going to work. You just have to kind of just like close your eyes and just run. Really.
Feels a little bit like a military boot camp. Like you just kind of have to give
A
up.
little bit.
Gotta give up everything, preconceived notions, and just go with it. And then at the end, you're something different than you were at the beginning.
Yeah, I think it really, like the SCA, like I didn't believe it when I went on my selection day. I was like, there's no way. But everyone was like, no, it changes you. And I heard from alumni, and they say it's not just something that it's not about getting a job necessarily. They do kind of rewire the way that you think. They kind of like take you apart and then put you back together.
That's what they do in the military. They break you
Yeah,
down
yeah. They
and
take
build you back up the way that they want you built up. And I think that the shortness, we mentioned, it's 10 months, very intensive.
Intense.
Basically what would be a 3-year program in 10 months. That intensity and working closely with a small group of people creates that environment where you kind of like break down very quickly and then get reassembled into ideally a productive advertising industry member who's going to be gainfully employed for long-term future.
I have some lawyer friends I wish would take this course just to change the way they think.
Yeah,
that ship has sailed. It's just too late.
I'm just gonna throw out. You sparked something. I'm gonna throw out a long-term pet peeve that I have, which is, a lot of advertising gets approved by lawyers, and there are lawyers that specialize in advertising
Yep.
law, and there are those that don't, and there's like house counsel that work like, at the clients or whatever. And I think that those people should be trained in advertising, because um the typical lawyer response for anything is, no, you can't do that. And their response should be, you can't do exactly that, but I see what you're trying to do, and you could get away with it by doing this, and
Yeah.
have them be part of the creative process. And I think the really good advertising lawyers understand that. That's what makes them good. But too many of them are just kind of generally trained in-house counsel, who, for very good reason, are trained to be very conservative.
Yeah.
But when it comes to advertising and marketing, I think that a little bit of ad training would.
Well, that and
benefit.
improv is
Yeah.
all about yes and. It's yes and. If you say no to what your partner or what someone else in your group has just said, you've killed the skit. You've got to say yes and keep it going. And lawyers are trained to say no, as Henry said.
No.
Yeah. So Carlotta and Emily, we wish you much, much success. You are in a great place. We have so much admiration for your dean, Mark Lewis, and we've always enjoyed talking with recent graduates, and now you are still involved. So thank you so much for joining Henry and me on the Brief Brothers.
Thank you so much for having us. It's
Yeah.
so fun.
Thank you, guys. It's been really fun.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
He's Howard Ibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye-bye.